Hi, Christian. It's lovely to connect with you again. My goodness, I am enjoying these conversations so much. So I was wondering, just for the people that will be listening into this, how long you've been learning the principles?
I came to the principles about 6 years ago. I should say that I had an earlier exposure through Joe Bailey's book 25 years ago, but at that point, I thought it was a great book, and it's still his book is called The Serenity Principle, and it's still a book I recommend to people. And at the end of it, I wanted more. And I now know that I also hadn't fully grasped what's on offer. Indeed, I still haven't fully grasped everything, but because there was nowhere to go at that time for someone in Scotland, I kind of let it. I kind of let it slip. I didn't appreciate the power of what was on offer. And when I came back to it 6 years ago, which I stumbled on the principles, I went on I was an NLP master practitioner, and I went on a course about growing a business with integrity. And it turned out it was all about the principles, and it hit me like a train. It hit me like a train. This is where I have been looking for. At that point, I'd had something like 2 or 3 decades of searching, all sorts of difficulties and struggles in my life. And I had complete certainty that I'd found the solution, and that somehow I would be involved in this for the rest of my life. And of course, it was also a sense of back to the drawing board in terms of training. I'd trained in NLP and hypnotherapy at that point. So yes, that was my first proper exposure, or maybe commitment to it. Or a real opening to it, a real sense of this is for me.
Yeah, but you had a very professional legal background as well, didn't you?
Yeah, I had, at that point, I'd been a lawyer for 30 years, I think, and I had, I was reasonably successful in my career, and that was my day job, if you like, and I worked with clients in a very small way at that point, kind of on the side. And I was also involved in working with people with addictions, alcoholism in particular. Again, that was on a voluntary basis, and I had done that. I'd had my own issues with alcohol in my 20s, and since that time, that had been part of my life as well.
My goodness, so that's a huge turnaround, isn't it? From this professional lady in a suit in the legal world with her own personal troubles, finding something so life-changing. Must have been quite transforming for you.
Yeah, well, it was an interesting time because almost immediately after that course, I came back to Scotland. The course was in London. I came back to Scotland, and my father became very, very ill and died very quickly. And as it happened, that the trainer, one of the trainers on the weekend, had spoken about going through his father's death and doing so at a higher quality of mind. And what he said sort of struck me, but it didn't seem relevant particularly to me because I didn't know that my father was terminally ill. But when this thing happened, I had a very strange experience. It was a very important spiritual experience, I would say. That there was grief, there was loss, but there was also a profound sense of this is an important and connecting experience in life, and I think my children felt the same, and it was deeply moving. And that surprised me because it wasn't about putting on any kind of I wasn't putting on a brave face or being strong for me. It wasn't that at all. It was coming through me, not a mask or an effort.
Yeah.
And the next couple of years were absolutely tumultuous for me. What was interesting was the amount of just automatic well-being, peace, everything else that was happening. My mother died the following year, again after hers was a longer illness and quite unpleasant, and I showed up in a different way for that, I had a couple of health emergencies myself. My kids were at the stage of leaving home. So, really big things kept happening. Too many to go into here, but it was very interesting. It was almost, as though just experiencing with a degree of peace and security that I couldn't have imagined. Things that, had you asked me, I might have thought would rock me to the core.
Yeah, it's extraordinary, isn't it? How we can look back on something like that and see so clearly that our experience is different.
Mm-hmm.
So you and I met 2 years ago, didn't we, at a retreat, which was all about the paradigm within the principles, which Sydney Banks uncovered through insight.
Yeah.
So do you want to talk about the paradigm work that you're engaged in at the moment?
Yes. So it's as I see the three principles paradigm, it's a way of talking about the principles that makes it very clear that what Sydney Banks saw and what exists are psychological, spiritual principles that have always existed, but haven't been clearly identified, articulated, or understood, and at least in anything that I've come across prior to Sid Banks' experience in the 1970s. And they're principles in the same way that gravity is a principle. So it existed before Newton had the apple fall on his head and had his eureka moment. But Sid's experience was a eureka moment as well. But he didn't invent gravity. It was always there, and the principles have always been there, and they explain. The paradigm points to how they explain in a very logical and even scientific way how human experience exists. And as I see that, it's explaining that all human experience, my experience, your experience here, are coming through the power of thought. That's to say that no outside circumstance or no past event or no future projection or no other person has the power to create a feeling in me unless I have thinking about that outside, that external thing, which is the true creator of the feeling. And I sometimes use the analogy if it's a bit like the fuse in a plug. If you take the fuse out, there's no power goes through it. Now that analogy only goes so far because a fuse is a very inert thing, and thought is the most phenomenal power in the universe. It's an extraordinary gift that we have.
Yeah.
But each of us is constantly, in any moment, simply feeling the thinking that's going through us. And that's why 100 people faced with the same, say, crisis, like a road accident or something like that, or a fire, will have 100 different responses because they've got at least slightly different thinking, or sometimes vastly different thinking about the event. And this sounds like such a small point, but the leverage that's available from this small point is absolutely immense, and it's shown up once people have an insightful understanding of this role of thought. It's quite extraordinary how their lives change, and that those changes and those outcomes have been showing up since people started talking about this work, 40 years ago. And it was some of those outcomes that really got my attention on that first weekend. In law, I'd always worked with groups with lots of problems. Crime was a big one. Family breakdown, disability, incapacity, social security benefits. People who had all sorts of different problems and what might be considered challenging lives or challenging life circumstances. So I was kind of aware in these different areas of interventions that were brought in, and mostly they were not successful. They might be expensive, or they might be less so, but if you got a 1 or 2 or 3% improvement in whatever you were trying to fix in any of these areas, I mean, that was phenomenal. That was considered phenomenal. In the 3 principles world, I mean, outcomes of a sort of 75% increase, and even more, are documented throughout the last 4 decades, and across the board in every area that this work has been brought into. And that really got my attention. There was one in particular where a murder rate in a town in the west coast of America had gone from something like 700 murders a year, which is kind of 10 times what it is here in Glasgow, and to nil. Now, not overnight, but over 2 years. And I mean, why is this not? Why do I not know about this? This is my field, but why is this? And people in that project had been given a presidential medal from Clinton when he was president, and it's just it's out there. But it's interesting how, because the understanding is pointing to something other than the received wisdom at the moment in the field of social ills, which is really pointing to things like external circumstances such as poverty, child rearing, disability, disease, mental health issues as the cause of ills, and this work challenges that, and and I think people sometimes have difficulty even exploring it. There's a contempt prior to investigation, to borrow a phrase from the addictions world.
So it's wonderful if people can keep an open mind.
Yeah.
And given the research recently done at the Mayo Clinic, where only 11% of people were worked with, and yet the results were nothing short of remarkable, I think that's something really to take note of. Yeah.
Yes, I'm looking forward to one of the facilitators, Joe Bailey, a psychologist. In fact, the same Joe Bailey who wrote the book. So that was I had here doing an event here in Glasgow last year, and he spoke about those results, and I think they measured about 10 or 12 different areas, like response to challenging situations, degrees of burnout, and again across the board. This was working with physicians. There was this kind of 75% improvement in outcomes after a 3-day training. So it'll be interesting to see where those figures go and what impact they have.
What was fascinating also that came out of that research was that stress is not caused by adversity. I was very taken with that.
Yes, and they in fact they point to other studies that show this, and I guess we have always known that, in the sense that if you hear something about X% of children who have been abused will go on to abuse, but then there's the other percentage, which is usually greater than the X% who don't. And what's interesting is none of this is saying that abuse of children or poverty are good things, but it's looking at what makes those who don't have problems later on resilient. What is that? And that's where the 3 principles comes in, and it's pointing to, underneath the moment-to-moment thought, which can take us anywhere, is this innate resilience. It's more than resilience, but resilience is part of what each of us has within us, and which can't be broken, irrespective of what has happened to us, what is happening to us, or even how we think and feel in a given moment. Underneath that this resilience is there. And again, I know that to be true. I've witnessed over nearly 30 years people recovering from alcoholism, and it doesn't matter where they are. And I'm, talking about people who've maybe been on the streets, homeless, or, in locked wards, mental hospitals, and so on. When that essence of the person is woken up, when they stop the self-destructive behaviour, and when they are pointed in the direction of their own essence, remarkable transformations take place. And it doesn't involve a lot of money. It doesn't involve any money. It's it's an inside job, and people are helped by seeing the example of other people's, and you can actually see someone's light up, as though their eyes, that their face is lit up. You can see that change that occurs in people. So I know that is there. It doesn't matter how low somebody has gone in terms of their life experience, it's possible. And it seems to me that an understanding of the three principles paradigm is even more upstream than the work that's done with alcoholics. It's universal, and it's more powerful.
So what of the future, Christian? Who would you love to work with, and who would you love to be of service to?
Well, we were talking about this before, and I had this question asked of me. I was on another interview about a year ago, and somebody asked this, and I kind of just blurted out, something along the lines of, I think what I have to offer is helping people who are in distress to find a better quality of life, to be happier. And as I said it, I was very judgmental of myself, because it seemed really pathetic, that other people had very clear visions about, what they were doing. And mine was a bit sort of like the kind of answer, from a 60s, pageant, I want to help the world. But actually, as I reflected on that, I thought that is the truth. I have known a lot of distress in my life, and I was so unaware of the fact that I was innocently creating it for myself. And I love the title of one of Jai Pransky's books, Somebody Should Have Told Us. If I'd known then what I know now, my life would have been very different. But it is as it is. Yeah. And I can certainly speak with complete authenticity of having touched some very low places. And I don't underestimate in any way the power of thought to create pain and distress. But I also know from an entirely personal and embodied experience, as well as an observer of the people that I work with, that it's totally possible to have an utterly different quality of life.
That's beautiful.
So it's people who want that, who want a better quality of life. There's a great sort of coaching question, I think, from the old paradigm of psychology is what you've got today, would it be good enough for your son or daughter, assuming the person has a son or daughter? And it's surprising how people say, no way. No way. Yeah. So why is it good enough? Why is it good enough for you? And what I'm about is you don't have to have that experience of a life that wouldn't be good enough for your son or daughter anymore.
And given all of that then, Christian, how do you see the future for the principles? Well, I mean, worldwide, in terms of outcomes and implications?
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure if this is quite the question you're asking, but the answer that occurs to me is I had an insight towards the end of 2017 that my role is to try and encourage the grassroots sharing of the principles. It's interesting that between when I first came across the principles in Joe's book that was in 1990, and I came back to it in 2010-11. It had barely grown. It was on the verge of a big growth spurt. but I also have awareness of the whole 12-step program because of my personal experience there. And by the time it was 40 years old, it had reached millions.
Yeah.
And I've been intrigued. Why has the principles had such a slow spread? And it seems to me that the traditional answer was that, it's the formless nature of the principles. But A was something very new and formless and spiritual when it came in, and that wasn't hampered by it. And I've increasingly not accepted that. And it seems to me that possibly that the over professionalism of it has got in the way, and not. I mean, clearly this might sound like a paradox, since I am, a facilitator, a coach, a teacher, whatever you want to call it, and I'm paid for my services. But it seems to me that that's not the only way to go. That also, or that more could be done to empower people to share it themselves and from where they are. And I did a quick calculation the other night, and I thought, suppose each person who's been touched by the principles themselves touched or impacted 4 more people in a year. And if that went on over a 10-year period, 1 billion people would be touched. Now, I'm not suggesting that as a formula, it's just a kind of illustration. Because 40 years down, the community, the people who are actively engaged in whether personally or whether sharing and facilitating, just seems to be a few thousand. So it seems to me that grassroots spread has to be one of the ways to go if we're going to, offer other people the opportunity of a better quality of life through this understanding. And the other thing for the future, I think, is that the one of the difficulties is that everybody's got different ways of sharing this, and that's fine. That's inevitable. Back to separate realities. We all have different thoughts, different insights, and so on. But it does seem to me that understanding the principles as a paradigm, pointing to the logic, which pointing to the way it works, and what I mean by that is that 100% of our experience is coming not from circumstances, but from our thinking in the moment, and the universality of that, the simplicity of that, which enables people to then have an insight about what's underneath that thinking and feeling that connection with their essence. It's very simple and transmissible, and it's a way people will make it their own, and it will be it is how each of us sort of sees it, the bits are important to it. But there is an essential simplicity and clarity there that I think makes the principles something that is more easy to teach and transmit to others. So I think that will help. But also personally, I when we met at the same time as we both really got into this understanding of the 3 principles as a paradigm of a very straightforward, simple way of understanding it. And I think for both of us, but certainly speaking for myself, the change that has occurred in the last 2 years has been almost as impactful as the change that occurred when I first got into it 6 years ago. And there's a new level of peace of mind, clarity, and changes in the outside world. My practice has been much more sustainable. I feel that I've been more effective with clients, that they have experienced more rapid transformation, deeper transformation. So I'm a great fan, great advocate. It doesn't make sense for me to teach it, if teach is the right word, or point people to anything other than that.
Mm. And I know that we've both experienced levels of effortlessness.
Yeah.
So much less struggle in life.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't imagine anybody who wouldn't want that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's what you bring to the table. You can point them towards a much more ease-filled life. And that's a beautiful thing for anybody.
Yeah, yeah. And just to give a little example of that, yesterday was a busy day for me, and I achieved a lot. It was a good day, and there were one or two. We reached sort of late afternoon, and there were one or two things sort of still on my to-do list. That I hadn't got down, and I felt very tired, and I recognised in the moment there was a time when I'd have got into a real sort of internal struggle of trying to force myself to do it. And then I just had, a moment of clarity, of insight that none of this actually has to be done today. And that really the better thing would be just to leave it. And I was able to drop any thoughts of, kind of beating myself up for not doing it, or what will so and so think that you didn't respond to their email within 12 hours, this sort of nonsense, which is the kind of just below the surface thinking noise that used to go on in my head a lot, and I just had a peaceful evening. And
that sounds wonderful, Christian. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it, and I learned a lot.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity, and great questions. I'm looking forward to our next conversation.
Take care.
Thank you, Anne. Bye-bye.